So sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. Just give me a minute.
Is the screen share visible? Is the timer visible?
Yeah, it's visible, Carl.
Perfect.
PM, can we start?
Okay. Yep. I'm going to start my speech in give me a minute. Oh, this is crazy. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. We should hope for a better world morally, right? For example, I think that it's the duty of the house to wish for that which is the most moral because of the capacity that we all share and the instantation for that particular reason in the world where it's an evaluative system of that particular world, which is to say a moral framework exists. The moral framework is utilitarianism, right? I think that this constructs, like what constructs this particular framework by which we should evaluate the world generally, is that which creates the least amount of suffering is the best world. The reason why this is true is because of the intuition that we universally share pleasure, right? That pain is something that is morally bad, and putting it on someone for no reason is something that is primarily wrong at the end of the day. And that's the reason why we support this kind of world here. But then second, let's move into this debate, like truly, right? I think that the universe right now is something that is a black forest of uncertainty, right? A whole lot of factors that fundamentally limit individuals' ability to be able to do things like dream, right? To be able to do things like hinder your imagination and creativity in ways that darkens your perspective. It's one that clouds your ability to access not just inspiration for your life or for other individuals, but things like new perspectives and the reason why you exist at the end of the day. The problem with this is that most individuals who live within status quo are primarily filled with existential fear, right? They've hit a wall, they think that they've hit a wall in civilization that's most likely going to collapse at a point where most individuals, you have societies that are filled with wars at the brinks of collapse, right? It looks like things like climate change that we think would necessarily end civilization and cause all those kinds of suffering at the end of the day. We think that this is hugely something that is not beneficial for humanity to continue, and that's the reason why we don't support this kind of world. But then, first level of argumentation, why is it something that is morally right to end suffering? I think that in principle, right, in principle, to knowingly cause suffering is something that is morally wrong. It looks like the massive rise in chronic illnesses, things like disease, inescapable death that we can't necessarily avoid, right? It looks like every child born into this particular world didn't choose to be born, right? And is forced into this wager of suffering or the pain of that existence necessarily guarantees, right? Hence, it's the reason why we think that the central moral flaw of life is that it perpetuates without permission, right? And takes away your choice agency mechanism that exists. What this primarily allows us to do is the chance to consent collectively, right? To say that we do not wish to impose pain upon other generations, even if it's in the name of progress at the end of the day. I think that, like, in terms of preemption, right, the whole idea that would most likely run within opening opposition is the idea of hope, right? The idea of saying, oh, but it looks like, say, humans have been able to create means or probably areas like that helps them minimize suffering, right? Or it, like, puts humanity at a like technological era or all those kinds of things. I think that this debate has to be evaluated on the harms outweighing the benefits, right? It means that what exists in terms of probability and scale, right, is that you have huge, massive suffering of individuals, especially majority of individuals, right, not being able to have access to these kinds of utilities that is able to give them access or able to generate or probably give them the ability to live a good life, right, or probably the ability to like maximize, like live a dignified life at the end of the day, right? Because of things like, say, the inability to have social capital or probably be born from certain demographics or certain like communities at the end of the day, which primarily means they don't necessarily have access in the vast majority of instances to access such pleasure like or such benefits at the end of the day, right? But two, I think that it's not just about human suffering, right? It's also about things like, say, animal subjugation, why animals are subjected, right? And it's worse, right? And why it's something that is worse to continue. It looks like, say, the incentive and the capacity that we have to subjugate animals. Why? Things like, say, because we like food, because it's tasty, because it's a cheaper source of calories than any other alternative that would otherwise exist. But two, it looks like, say, we have the asymmetry of technological progress relative to animals, right? Things like, say, we have guns, we have machines that are able to do things like, say, eliminate them or eradicate them if we wish to. We think that the pain is worse off for all the following reasons within the several actors that we've mentioned, right? One, it's the feeling of anxiety and fear. But two, it's the ability for you or any other individuals to compare their relative state of life to any other beings that exist. So it looks like you always constantly comparing your state of life. Do I have a job? Am I being able to cater? Do I have the capacity to cater for myself, to carry out certain obligations that society primarily puts on me, to make life better for myself and my loved ones as compared to any other individuals who live within society? We think that thirdly, it's the feeling of being lost, right, that constantly plague individuals within society because they have the incapacity to create such utility for themselves and those who they cherish more. But lastly, and more importantly, it's the feeling of nihilism, that you're a second-class citizen and your life is something that is necessarily meaningless at the end of the day. And that's the reason why we say it's primarily morally, it's morally right for us to end suffering at the end of the day. Why then is the positive impact from up that we talk about, why it doesn't matter? But before I go on, I hear a POI. Yeah, shoot your POI.
Yeah, Hassana, I think you need to recognize that individuals feel suffering in a different way that you have to talk about. Justify in principle why those that do not feel more suffering like the other people should be robbed of the things they enjoy.
Yeah, that's the idea, right? I think that you want your world wants to protect the minority. So those who are rich, right, who don't necessarily feel suffering like the most majority of people. And I think that's where the problem comes. Because oftentimes, right, and that's the problem with society and why we need to stop its existence. Society in itself the universe, right now is like gives individuals or certain groups of individuals a hierarchical power over other individuals to constantly oppress them. It looks like, say, you might like oppressing minority groups because you have that asymmetry of power and the monopoly of power to cause them harm. We think that that is something that is primarily very important that we need to stop, because notice how harm has constantly been intergenerational. It looks like, say, the harm that was posed on Black Americans or all those kinds of minority groups is something that is currently still happening, but that's still affecting them till date, right? And that's the problem, right? Because if your world wants to say, oh, let's not rob other individuals because there has to be they don't necessarily, there's no disproportionate way of feeling pain, right? You think that that is something that is inevitable and we need to do. Like, we need to generally consider the mass majority of people who are necessarily suffering at the end of the day. And that's the reason why we propose. Here.
All right. Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for the fine speech. Leader of Opposition.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, Color.
All right, cool. Sorry, just a second late. So I'm looking for where I can turn off this airport sheet. Yes, is it better now? Sorry, because I was on airport before.
Wait, Kella, I think it was better initially, and it's not so comparatively not better now. So maybe.
So yeah, it's better now, yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you clear.
All right,
Clear
cool.
now.
All right, cool. Thank you very much. All right. I don't know. Shout outs. Mascots. Shout out to People Debating Union. And shout out to every incompetent nigga out there. Yeah. That being said, POIs in the, let me just put my chats. Yes, POI, you can ask in the chat space. I'm looking at the chat space. So I will definitely take POIs. Closing governments, please do also ask the POI. I will prioritizing closing governments. That being said, starting in 3, 2, sorry, give me a second. Yeah, starting in 3, 2, and 1. There is a big burden that opening government in itself fails to feel, which is the motion is speaking about a person making a decision for like all of humanity. I think there is a burden on opening government and closing government as well to try to prove why this individual first has that moral obligation to make a moral decision that's for like all of humanity in itself. Prime Minister don't do it. I think this is the bulk of where the debate in itself is supposed to be, primarily from Prime Minister, because all of the clarification and prioritization we get in opening governments in Prime Minister's speech in itself does not entail this big burden. In the vast majority of instances, what BP debating itself looks like, I don't think Deputy Prime Minister should come and like recharacterize what this burden in itself is for their own side. So if you are basically to weigh up this debate according to how the vote in itself is, it means that in like opening government is supposed to be out of this debate primarily. But then let's look at other things like and like how the debate itself is supposed to run, because they want to say that what we are trying to defend on our own side is like where you do get vast majority of like it's like happiness, but we don't think that might necessarily be where the debate is. And let's just break this down.
Clarity.
Good on closing government shoot.
Yeah, this debate models a hypothetical, like for example, this how you press the pause. It does not necessarily mean that we need to that this person has an obligation to protect other people's life. It's so breaking the motion from the life.
Like I wasn't really hearing you well, easier, but yeah, I think we were speaking about how it's not like you don't have to put the burden on. I didn't really hear you. I think we were like kind of like like lagging network or something like that. So let me just go into what the debate is here. Notice this panel, that the person that's most likely going to make this decision in itself is the average person in society. And vast majority of people that want to make this society in itself like are people that let me say like are average, not so rich and not so elite, like what to do in society right now. But then I think there's a question on why a poor person, someone that's struggling, someone who like in itself always hopes for a better tomorrow, who then wants like ends their life in turmoil, given that in vast majority of instances, people that are of average status in society are the ones that always want to try more for a better society so that they can be uplifted in itself in the particular framework in itself, because they are not always happy with the fact that they are not always like so happy with the fact that they're always allied in the society, but then it's still a driving motivation for them to like want to strive towards a better tomorrow, particularly for their lives and all those kind of things. I think that in itself it's like what makes like these people in itself not basically able to like make these kind of decisions for the world in itself. But I think on our own side, we are going to prove why suffering in itself is something that is a moral good for society in itself to exist, and why it's very like good for humanity at the end of the day. But notice before I go into the arguments, the argument that we try to prove from opening governments as to how suffering in itself is going to be something that is bad because of how humans in most instances are in constant lack of happiness is not necessarily true. What this argument in itself is basically a proof of the hedonic treadmill of humans. And this is how it works. Because humans might start from stage 1. And at the point where they get to stage 2, they always see something that is better, like see something like a stage 3 and all those kind of things. What this means is that because people understand that is something that's always better in life, they always want to strive for something that is more in life, even if they are within average status in society. What this means is that you are not always saddened, but one, You are happy with the fact that you can achieve a particular height within society, but beyond that, you know that there is a hope for a better tomorrow. That hope in itself, even if they try to like do a preemptive work of opening government as to how we cannot argue hope, and being that have broken that argument, you now prove why hope in itself is something that is still intertwined with the happiness that people still get at the end of the day. It still like makes their life in itself something that is basically better at the end of the day. So I think that in itself does make opening government in itself largely lose debate. But why do we think that suffering in itself is something that is good, within status quo? There are a couple things. One, the absence of suffering in itself eliminates the ability for humans in themselves to feel things like joy. What this means is that when you don't have things like suffering, people do not necessarily know what it means like to feel joy. But notice why this is important. Panel, notice that for every very good story you do get in status quo today, in society today, where it's always most likely a story of like things like from grass to grace. If you hear a story of someone that was most likely rich and got richer, people are not necessarily intrigued and are not motivated. This is because they understand that suffering is an integral form of humanity, and the ability to suffer in itself is something that's innate good. So that at the point where in itself you eliminate yourself from that level of suffering that you most likely did have in itself, it means that people already have vast majority of happiness at the end of the day. Note, panel, that even if people do not see gain that elite status that they most likely have craved for, it doesn't still eliminate the fact that people that open itself and that ability for people to eliminate themselves from the place where they once were in itself is a net good, and we are proud to defend the word where suffering in itself is good. All those kind of things. No PY for now. But then I think the second thing, and this is what they do not answer, is why is it important for one person or for a decision to be made to rob human of all of the different values, or to devalue human of all of the moral rights that they necessarily did have prior to within existence? Note that what you are doing is that you're not only necessarily taking away the lives of everybody in the status quo, but notice that even for poor people, for people that are suffering in society, their biggest fear is still the fear of death. When you tell somebody, oh, they're going to die, people are still threatened. That is why even the poor people in society still go to church just to avoid things like death and the fear of death, death in itself, etc., etc. It means that these people in themselves always want to avoid the things like death in itself that you want to give to them at the end of the day. If they die of natural circumstances is a different thing, but dying putting the particular thing that they always avoided to them is something that is very, very, very bad. But why is it still even worse off on their own side? Because you devalue people like children that don't even have to know whatever it means to be suffering or to be enjoying at the end of the day. You take away this incentive for people to have the capacity to live on their own side. You erode people from the ability to either feel the suffering or feel the happiness in itself at the end of the day. But notice also that even for people that are also always suffering, they still want to have to maximize the level of suffering that they suffer, and so at the end of the day attain some level of joy. Notice, panel, that for even this popular society, look at how it works here. At the point where they suffer to a very, very large extent and they feel a tangible bit of joy, they are so much gladdened for that little thing that gives them joy, because they know how much they must have suffered in society. We think that taking away even the ounce of joy that they must have had just because you want to eliminate whatever you call suffering in society is something that is incredibly immoral within society, and it's something that even those poor people, the poorest of the poor, are not most likely going to be happy with. If you say that suffering is the reason why you want to take away this particular thing, you think that suffering is good, they're going to defend that from our own side. Proud to oppose.
All right, thank you very much, Leader of Opposition, for the fine speech. Deputy Prime Minister.
All right. Am I audible?
Yeah, Jonathan, you're audible.
Okay. Kindly forgive me if my voice sounds coarse. I'm not doing too well. I'm sure you can still hear me. For POIs, from my third or fourth minute, please just feel free to just say POI, and I will take you. I'll do all to take you. Also, for a quick shout out to everyone who's been in this space and not given up yet. I think that there's a point in debate where you most likely are at the verge of losing focus, especially when you don't make it to places like finals, which is only open to about 8 people. And so, of course, not everybody gets to finals. And usually not even breaking gives you a whole lot of breakdowns. But to everybody out there who hasn't made it this far, just know that your time would come. Just patience. But of course, we are still going to end all humanity within this motion. and I'm sure that you'll be fine regardless if you no longer exist. I'll be starting my debate then in just a second. I'll be starting my debate then in 3, 2, and 1. The very first reason why opening opposition is not making it anywhere near the trophy for this finals is simply because they question who the actor is, and that defies every logic of how debate is run in the 21st century. The first thing they say is whether or not the actor making the decision should have any moral obligation to make the choice for all of humanity. And then at some point, they further extend this to characterize that individual, most likely as an average individual. First of all, we don't think that makes any sense, because if you look at the motion itself, it explicitly says this house speaking for all of humanity. What this means is that the motion in itself assigns the moral agency to the house. And so you don't get to question it in itself because it becomes redundant. The motion itself grants that actor or the house the ability to do that moral capacity to do that. It means that it really doesn't make any sense. But then they move on to characterize the house and an average person. First of all, panel, it's very misleading, and it's one that is supposed to create a distraction to you. Every impact they build on that sort of framing is meaningless and doesn't make sense. And here's why. Because you need to understand that the house in itself is a representation of all the moral collective judgments that exist, not just a literal individual. Because if you pick and choose a single individual to represent the house, then the most likely is going to be a moral bias, not taking into consequence the psychology of all people that exist within the world. And we think this debate then becomes about the moral consequence, not the psychology of some hypothetical decision maker. We don't think that makes sense. But then there's a very antithetical framework and idea that OO in itself builds for all of the argumentation, where they say that for suffering to exist, it becomes necessary, because without suffering, then happiness too cannot exist. So to them, it looks like there needs to be a contrast for people to be able to understand what happiness is if suffering doesn't exist. And they do that literally within the context of trying to prove that suffering in itself is not bad. And that is literally there to mitigate every single positive that Hassana tells you. First of all, and a simple response to this, I'm not going to spend so much time on it, is that happiness really doesn't require any contrast. Because you need to understand that happiness in itself is a positive state. So joy, curiosity, love, all these things exist independently of pain. And I think the intuition pump that lies here is, look at the most richest person in the world who most likely doesn't feel any huge amount of pain, except the existential one. Even these people can relate to new forms of happiness. That tells you they can feel happiness independently of all the pain that exists within the world. We don't think the presence of suffering becomes a prerequisite for pleasure. It is literally highlighting it, but it is not creating that moral or experiential value to what happiness is. That does not mitigate anything you get from Hassana. Being a final, we think we need to be more mechanistic than just saying that you need suffering to be able to guarantee happiness. But the first burden of proof that ties into everything that Hassana gives you is the idea that, well, it's morally obligatory for us to continue living. And that's literally the bulk of argumentation you get from opening opposition. Hassana already tells you it's not morally obligatory. And I'm going to be proving to you that on some other structural levels. And here's one. First of all, the moral obligation cannot be based on existence alone. And you see, if existence in itself becomes a justification for you to continue something, then morality in itself loses meaning. Because if you buy that logic, then it means every system that exists in itself is self-justifying because it exists, no matter how cruel it is. And so you need to understand that true morality would require that we need to evaluate whether that thing existing upholds moral values like compassion, justice, consent. But you need to understand that humanity's continuation, like Hassana tells you, fails all of these things because it is built on a non-consensual cycle of pain and loss. It tells you that existence itself cannot become a moral defense. But the second level of proof to show you that it is not a moral obligation, because I can't tell you for truth that CEO will most likely run around all those lines, is that the very idea that for each reason we choose this is because it breaches every level of compassion and consent. Hassan already tells you every new life is born into that wager. It never agreed to it. It suffers, you fear, you die. It's a violation of the consent that you have in the cosmic universe as a human being. So if morality demands that we minimize that harm, then when you continue humanity, you violate that ethical premise in and of itself. So when we choose to end it in absolution, it means that we are honoring compassion. We are preventing harm before it even occurs. We are freeing every future's consciousness from inheriting all that inevitable suffering that exists. And I also show you why that classism argument you get from them doesn't make sense when they say, well, there are some people that enjoy life, some people don't also feel the pain and all of those things. I'll prove to you why it doesn't make sense. But before I even move on, here's a very unique extension that still wins us. It's a flip of the argumentation that brings into focus the idea of sunk cost. The fact that human beings have invested so much in our survival, so then we have a duty to continue. Now, panel, note this. That in itself sounds emotionally persuasive, but it's not morally and logically sensible. And here's the reason why. The fact that you have a past investment does not create that moral obligation for you to continue, especially when the outcome gives you a lot of harm, like Hassana tells you. Like, for example, I cannot tell Franco to stay in some abusive relationship because they've been together with that person for so long. That rational and ethical thing for them to do is to walk away once you see that continuation only deepens pain. And you need to understand here that humanity's investment, whether science, art, civilization, all these things may have been meaningful, but their existence doesn't justify continuing, especially when continuation in itself gives us a lot of suffering. That tells you in itself, we cannot be premised on those narratives. Fine, let's also go into the argument that says, well, to some extent, we have made some gains in the past. Doesn't that give us reason to hope? And panel, when I flip this, we are winning the finals. Because the idea that entire upbench is going to run on this, well, we've made some progress, we're suffering, but at some point, now technology and all the other things are making us probably get some level of enjoyment. I'm going to flip that on very simple levels. One, we agree that suffering exists and humanity continues because, well, to some idea, like CEO will tell you, suffering can be mitigated, progress, all those things. What I'm going to show you within this narrative and framework is that mitigation in itself, one, is uncertain, two, it's slow and it's insufficient because that cosmic belt becomes morally superior. The first thing you need to understand is that the question is not about whether suffering can be mitigated. Take note of that. The question is whether it can ever be fully eliminated while humanity continues. The reason why this is fair is because the choice that we make from OG is absolute, with absolute ends and absolute impact. The same burden should be borne on OO if they can make the choice to stay alive. It means they can't just say that, well, we are making some progress, so at some point we'll be enjoying. No, it's whether you can have a full elimination of all the things that cause human being suffering. We don't think that is practicable, and so they can't win on those levels. But even the mitigation in itself isn't effective because suffering is unavoidable in conscious life, like disease, death, conflict, that existential anxiety. It means every attempt to reduce suffering in itself creates some new form of suffering. Your technological advancement is creating climate risks, inequality, existential threats. All these things show when we do this for the world, we are way better and we win from opening government.
Thank you very much, DPM, for the fine speech. Deputy Leader of Opposition, close the top half.
Hello guys, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, Serge.
All right, thank you so much. POS in the chat, guys. Do not unmute your mic for any reason whatsoever. I am begging. Do not unmute your mic. Closing government, ask in the chat. I'm going to try to take you as much as I can. Quick shout out to my partner, Kela. This has been a tough ride. Prelims were crazy. We're happy to make it to the finals, and we hope it has a good outcome. Nothing more. I'm going to be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Deputy Prime Minister is very ridiculous in his intro because he says we question the moral agency of the actor. I mean, if you check the WDC manual, this is an actor motion, for Christ's sake. So someone is speaking for all of humanity. We think there is an incentive, like teams can challenge or talk about that moral agency, but he speaks of it as if that's where my partner's case ends. I think that's not where the debate ends anyways. We just like question the moral agency. And the reason why I want you to think about this is because people feel suffering in different ways. This is important. People value suffering. There are some people that are not suffering the way they make the debate want to look. There are some people that have some form of enjoyment and all of that. The biggest question we raised was that is this person in the right to make this decision for everybody within that particular framework, given that some people still have some form of benefits and happiness that they still see in the life that they say is bad. But please, let's move away from that because that's not where the debate begins and ends. There are a lot of other beautiful things to talk about. I'm going to be doing 2 things in this speech. The first thing I'm going to do is to respond to all the claims from opening government talking about the evolution of humanity. The second thing I will do is to weigh the impact of the evolution of human suffering and happiness and why it's better. Of course, we agree this is a hypothetical motion, so we need you to imagine what it would look like if you take the cosmic bet and choose to end humanity totally. We say we don't want to do that because we think things are better at the end of the day. Let's do this quickly. I think he says that first, every attempt to end suffering creates a new form of suffering. He doesn't explain to you that that new form of suffering is different from the old form of suffering that we once witnessed. That's what humanity has been all about. We agree that we are flawed human beings, but the biggest thing and the biggest uniqueness of humans is that humans are smart. And at every point in time where we have faced an obstacle, we have fixed those obstacles. I'm going to explain this so you understand this. This means that the human life in and of itself, even though suffering exists, is one that is beautifully made to overcome those sufferings in specific ways in and of themselves. Let's talk about this so you understand what exactly the claim here is. We say that the human life is a storybook in progress. We are species that are defined by invention, evolution, and constant reinvention. Let's talk about this in three key ways. The first form is, if you look at the evolutionary phase of humanity, early humans lived like any other animals live. They had survival instincts, etc. The first radical leap in the human history was language, where we gained the ability to communicate meaning, story, and store memory in a specific way. The next form of these were the tool and fire era, where we began to change the world, not just live in it, but to determine what we could make do of the specific things that we had. Then we had the agricultural phase, the agricultural industrialization phase, where we moved from nomadic struggle to creating stable communities. Then there was writing, where we were able to externalize memory, enable science, and do all the certain things that have changed the way the writing world looks like. Then the Industrial Revolution, where technology began amplifying human power. And now in status quo, we are in the age of genetic editing, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, space exploration, where we are looking at a new form of life. This means that every stage that humans have gone through would have looked impossible to humans that existed before. If you showed the caveman a smartphone, he would think it was magic. Second piece of this then is to explain that from the first piece, every leap and every evolutionary phase reduced suffering. Contrary to the idea that suffering is permanent, life expectancy increased, child mortality decreased, extreme poverty dropped in the world from 75% to below 20% in 200 years exclusively. Violence, war, deaths, hunger, all these things dramatically reduced when you compare now to 100, 200 years before. This means that we are a species that has constantly made life better than it was before. The intuition, therefore, is that the past was not any form of paradise. It was disease. There were diseases without medicines, where people died from childbirth. But now there are certain things that have changed all those things, where there were violence without laws and without constant status quo. This means if our ancestors took the government bench proposition, none of our improvements would have happened. The last phase of this analogy is that we are now on the edge of multiple transformational breakthroughs. Look at status quo. This is an important payoff. Because they tell you the sunk cost. I say, don't unmute. Please don't annoy me. The sunk cost in the debate, they say, oh, all the past investments of humanity to make lives better has not paid off. So let us walk away. That's what the PM tells you. We say, no, it has paid off. Gene editing can cure hereditary diseases permanently now than it did before. Artificial intelligence is accelerating scientific discovery. Fusion energy in status quo can end energy scarcity forever. Brain-computer interfaces, as we have discovered, could restore mobility and memory and perception in ways that we do not recognize. Space habitation, like Elon Musk is proposing, can potentially end existential vulnerability and all those things. We are in the most transformative century of the human history, the point where suffering may actually become non-existent. We think we can move on that. CG, shoot your POI before I enter my seat.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that Yeah, so what you're saying is that when a rapist decides to kill himself, it's bad because the rapist can become a better person in the future.
No, that's not the analogy. It's not that the rapist can become a better person in the future, but that in the future we can find a better way to deal with the rapist in a different way from status quo. That's what humanity is all about. That's the analogy. I think like these analysis that I have given you does two things. The first is it engages opening government on the sunk cost analysis, because from my analogy, you recognize that there is a payoff that we can see from the investments from the past. But secondly, it responds to the moral claim on whether or not we should end suffering, because it gives you a pragmatic proof that the evolutionary standards of status quo can dissolve all those type of problems that they talk about. But secondly, let's impact the suffering analysis. I think this is important. This is very important in this debate. When we say that we are okay with suffering, it's not like, oh, we just like suffering. But the idea is that that's the only way you can quantify the happiness that you gain. That's the only way you are able to know that certain struggles have paid off. Because when suffering does not exist, happiness ceases to have value. It's the same thing with sadness.
All right,
the only reason
thank
you know
you
laughter has
very
value is
much.
the absence of sadness. We
Thank
think
you very much.
humanity is going to be better. Proud to oppose.
All right, thank you very much, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for closing the top half of the debate. Member of Government, open the closing half. Member of Government.
Franco, can you hear me?
I can barely hear you, sir.
Yeah, give me a second then.
This is better.
Okay, since everyone is giving shout outs, let me try and give some.
You can choose not to, Israel, actually. You can choose not to.
Yeah, I think this should be better now. Franco, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I was just saying you can choose not to give the shout out. Don't be influenced.
Oh, I was coming to give you a shout out too. but that's fine. I think everyone is a wonderful person. All the judges are wonderful people. I wouldn't want to annihilate you, but then that's the circumstances of the debate. I don't think like you should judge the debate on any sentimental grounds, because truly I wouldn't want to annihilate you as a human being. Yeah, that's my shout out, and I hope we have a wonderful final. Yeah, so let me put on an on-screen timer here. So I because I wouldn't be watching the timer that is provided by Car. That's why I don't get messy. Stopwatch, okay. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. OG was winning the debate until Jonathan gave the response that deeply flawed their case. Because if Jonathan's case is that people can experience joy in completely separate ways from suffering, then the question becomes, why end the world at all if other alternatives exist? Their logic becomes redundant. The way in which we approach this debate from CG is differently and more effectively, and that will take opening opposition also out. We are going to show you, just at the top of the meta that I'm going to do, that majority of people that exist now experience net suffering in ways that they cannot escape because they do not have the capacity to escape. What this argumentation does is that it proves to you that they don't even have the capacity to experience anything meaningful that they can use to benchmark the pain opening opposition sees for them to create that inherent joy, which means that the world on net in of itself is massively disutile. So even if there's a potential for any happiness, the conglomerate and aggregation is a net utility. That means that we need to end that disutile world. Why do we think this is true? Because for majority of 2/3 of people within the global population, they are poor people that fall below the poverty line. They form the majority of people who are locked in systems of inequality, shackled by repetitive patterns of failure. Most of the global rich concentrate wealth in things like inheritances, networks, fixed access, which most of them do not have. The lower class work 3 to 4 jobs. They feel minimum wage jobs. They do not have superfluous income to be saved to do anything so happily, like going on vacations or all those other things for them to get that benefit. Most times, loans are largely inaccessible to these groups of people because they lack huge collateral to take significant loans to do things like startups and all those other stuff. This means that the majority of the poor people who are poor ones that need to probably benchmark those things with the very suffering to create a pain or create the realization of everything mascot tells you, do not have the capacity to even create that other alternative world to benchmark it with the pain that they claim on their side to create that utility for them, which means that opening opposition do not get that inherent claim that they claim that suffering is meaningful on their side of the house. They're out of the debate. Opening government is also out of the debate, again, because they don't respond massively to opening opposition. This is where our extension starts within the debate. First of all, let's establish the framework in which you evaluate morality. OG assumes that suffering alone is enough to justify their case, but we think this is insufficient. They never explain why minimizing suffering is the principle we should follow, or why utilitarianism, that is calculating net positive and negative experiences, is the proper framework. What they say is that, well, pain exists on the other side. We think pain exists in all moral systems. So deontology, virtue ethics, and other approaches also care about harm in some way. So simply pointing to pain does not tell us how to act or why one moral principle is better than the other. What we argue on our side from CG, even if it borrows from OG, is net utility. And we think that is the only defensible framework for this debate. Why? Because humans cannot objectively rank the value of one person's preferences over the other. We cannot know whose potential contribution or experiences are more important in any absolute sense. Any attempt to do so is limited by things like subjective bias. And the only universal criterion we can observe is experience itself, pleasure, pain, joy, suffering. These are shared by all conscious beings and can be aggregated across individuals and generations. The reason why net utility also works on scale is that most times this debate concerns billions of lives that the structural realities of existence hurt, and individual duties or virtues cannot guide decisions at this level. Only by measuring the balance of positive and negative experiences can we consistently evaluate the morality of continuation or cessation on our side. And that is why the framework we establish here within this debate wins. But notice the conversation in the opening half has been about, well, there is pain, there is happiness. This is why we enter the debate and we beat everybody. We agree that there's potential for happiness, there's potential for pain. Our extension is to prove why human existence is disutile on net. And that's why I established the framework of net utility for you to understand why human existence is disutile on net. And this beats OG because it answers the question that even if people experience some happiness, why should we seize the world from being existent? I'm going to analyze this on 5 structural levels. First of all, the first reason is psychological. Notice that the mechanism of hedonic treadmill, which all of them say within the opening half, ensures that happiness is not only cumulative, but it is fleeting. So when a person attains something they desire, the brain recalibrates the baseline, returning to the same level of dissatisfaction as before. The pleasure of a meal fades before the hunger of the next day. We think humans are wired to want endlessly and to chase satisfaction they cannot keep. The second level, don't stop badgering me. The second thing is why, like, The second reason is cognitive. And here is why. Because intrinsically, we think human consciousness evolved to detect threat rather than sustain joy. And that human consciousness of itself is pain. Why? Because negative experiences have a stronger psychological weight because they serve as defensive mechanisms as human beings. So evolution made things like pessimism adaptive, and it made fear a tool of survival. That same faculty that once kept early humans alive now keeps modern humans anxious, resentful, and exhausted. And we think that consciousness in of itself is pain. But thirdly, we think consciousness in of itself is not a gift but a burden because it forces humans to confront systems they cannot comprehend. For example, the weather, the economy, human body, all those other stuff. We think the awareness of this helplessness transforms existence into perpetual tension, which necessarily means that most times we cannot opt out of this painful consciousness within that instant. The last one is temporal. We think utility can only be experienced in the present. The past is memory and the future is anxiety. Yet the present moment is always fleeting, and within it lies discomfort than joy. Things like hunger, fatigue, loss, confusion, and fear. I've already analyzed you how a chunk of the global population fall within this aspect within that self. We think death in of itself is particularly pain because death in of itself becomes the final equalizer, not because it ends suffering, but because it consumes all joy retroactively. I think every happiness ends in the same silence that exists on our side. Why do we think the continuation of the world that exists on up continuously perpetuates this? Four things. First of all, population growth guarantees amplified demand for resources. So every additional consciousness requires food, water, shelter, and energy. And when human demand exceeds supply, societies resort to acquisition through things like coercion, deception, violence.
Thank you.
All these things are particularly terrible on that side
much
of the house.
Thank you very much, Member of Government, for the fine speech. Member of OP.
I'm audible.
Yeah, you're very audible.
All right. I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, it's very important to note that the arguments that side governments have run so far are basically the same arguments that Hitler gave for killing the disabled, that there are people who are suffering, etc., etc. And I'm going to show you why this argument doesn't work. The first thing in like very brief passing is that consent cannot be the silver bullet of Gov side because the debate is about choices that we are making, and some choices are better than others. Some choices are morally better than others, even if it is like reflective of the individual himself who is making the choice. This is not a coercive act. This is about making a choice. First thing in characterization, why utilitarianism isn't the metric for morality and why that takes Gov out. The first thing is that using utilitarianism as the metric for morality will justify the killing of disabled people because they are suffering. And if you kill them, they ultimately cease to exist. They do not feel pain. They do not feel pleasure. We think that is immoral. Second thing, to mean people with pain have less moral value than people with less pain. So that means that people like rich people who have a lot of wealth and a lot of ability to make themselves happy have more moral value than people who do not, and therefore their lives can be taken. The third thing, it would mean that non-human creatures have more value and like more worth if they can feel less pain or if they cannot feel pain at all, simply because of the absence of pain. The fourth thing is that it would mean that acts like, excuse my language, rape to people in a coma who never know are all right simply because they never felt the pain. Fifth thing, we think that it would be immoral to drag people forever to make them feel happy. We think that all of these show you why utilitarianism cannot be the metric for determining whether something is moral or not. So our first case or our first extension is the violation of human dignity that ensues in this. Not that this is a painless way for humans or humanity to kill themselves and to prevent themselves from like continuing to exist, right? And so this is basically suicide. Why do we think it is wrong? We think that human life is intrinsically valuable and it's not negotiable or it's not dependent on how much pain you feel. So the the mere fact that you feel more pain doesn't reduce the value, intrinsic value of your life, because the value of your life is determined by the fact that you're a human being, you're a rational agent. It is not determined on the amount of pain that you feel, else it would be less justified, it would be like more justified to kill someone who is going through pain or like in a war zone than it would be someone who is feeling happy. We think that doesn't make any difference. It would also mean things like if you kill minorities because they are suffering, like that is more justified than killing people who are not minorities. We think that is bad. Human dignity does not reduce when people are suffering. Crippled people do not have less human dignity. The whole point of this is to show you that like pain is not a justification for violating human dignity or for violating your own human dignity as a person, as an actor, as humanity. If human dignity is only based on pain too, we think that animals feel pain too, and like some plants also like feel some sort of stimulus, and those like creatures would have absolutely no difference from humanity. What that would mean is that even eating human beings alive would be no morally different from eating animals. At the end of the day, I've shown you that this is a violation of human dignity, and the fact that people are going through pain and we do not discuss that does not nullify it. Else it will mean whenever your brother is going through intense pain, having tooth gum issues, etc., the best moral action would be to clear him. We think that is not right. We also think that the instinct of people is to keep surviving,
OG.
even through suffering, not taking, even through suffering. Taking this action is equivalent to like killing your relatives because they are suffering. It's equivalent to things like this. It means the value of life is like placed on you, is placed on like the like hedonism or the amount of pain or not. But we also think it's important to note that like the future of humanity is not certain, right? The reason this is even more unjustified is that when you look at the track record of humanity, humanity is developing like ways to be able to keep themselves existing, etc. What that means is that when you kill yourself, you even like destroy yourself with when there's like evidence that you could actually get better or humanity could get better in the long run. We think that this is very immoral because at the end of the day you are clearing like the lives of humans in general, of yourself in general, over like existential crisis and things that are not like absolutely proven, and on the fact that there's even good track record to show that humans have a chance of continual existence. Our second case is on a moral obligation to the universe. The first thing to note is that humans have survived and evolved off the back of the environment, off the back of things like plants, animals, the earth. These things have sustained human beings. We think that when elements help you, even when like fellow human beings help other human beings to keep surviving, that is a moral good. That means that you should be able to recognize that as something that you should be morally grateful for. We think that so far the extent that they can potentially protect the universe, plants and animals who have a degree of sentience when like there's a case of like an existential threat to them because of things like their high cognition, the like increase of tech, like see what Elon Musk is doing, etc. We think that what you do is that these organisms have not developed to the ability where they have the ability to recognize and block harms, especially on a huge existential scale. Dissolving human beings means that you take away the defense, the potential defense of the universe and the environment that has helped it to continue to exist in the first place. Now you can't say we don't care about the existence, because even if you want to die on the assumption that my initial cases don't make sense, even if you want to die and in the past someone has helped you to survive when you wanted to, you still owe them a duty to continue remaining alive to protect them when they also need such protection. We think that is very important. We beat all other teams in this debate. Yes, POI, quickly.
Here is the thing. On your side of the house, even if you die, you leave a lot of people that constantly deal with your perpetual pain. On our side of the house, we all die together. So that endless cycle of pain does not happen to consciously hurt people.
Thank you. Pano, I think that CG clearly didn't understand our case. The analogies we were giving aren't conclusive. I'm not saying, oh, we are only killing minorities. I'm using the fact that killing minorities because they are disabled and suffering pain also means that if you kill human beings because humanity at large is suffering pain, it is like morally equivalent. So they misunderstood our case. Final case is that what dissolve our existence is to give in to evil. We think that when bigots attack minorities, they attack them to clear their existence. The last thing minorities want to do is to cease existing, to give in to these bigots. When diseases come your way, the aim is to take you out. We think that when forces in the universe are trying to take humanity out, and humanity has been fighting to continue to stay alive, to kill themselves painlessly, whatever mode, it is like an act of evil because it is giving into evil. We think that the morally better action to take is to fight the evil and continue to exist and continue to make prospects better. At the end of the day, we think that we are winning this debate. And on the whole idea of, oh, you are making like future generations suffer, so kill yourself. We think that when you bring it like to like the bare bare minimum. It's almost morally equivalent to saying, oh, kill minorities who are suffering, like crippled people, etc., or disabled people, so that future like minorities from that line do not suffer. We think that the act of killing yourself is morally equivalent to that, and it is evil, and we reject it. Proud to win from CEO.
Thank you very much, member for opposition. Government whip, close government's case. Here.
Hi guys, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, fantastic. Hi everyone, check out my username. It says Visit Vacation Spas. It's a debate project that I'm doing to help people spa and get better with constant practice. So check out the website and let me know what you think. That's it. Shout outs to the Vacation Spas management team for always volunteering to keep it running. Really, and I hope we do well. If you have a POI, do put it in the chat space. I would be looking at it. But Ezio, the DM is a lot. But I see it. I see it. Yeah. All right. Great. I'll start shortly. Just hold on. Give me a moment. I'm just trying to get the time, so sorry about this. Cool. I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1. Closing opposition is the team of funny analogies and funny rebuttals, because they say, number one, that we have an obligation to the environments that helped us, like plants and animals. That doesn't make sense. Number one, a lot of these things existed before human beings came along some few 5 million years ago. Like the dinosaurs were here and they left and the planet survived. Human beings are here. If we go and we get erased from cosmic existence, the planet and like the other cosmic entities would probably still be fine. Like some things survived. Cockroaches survived before humans. I think those guys would probably be fine. But then number two, like moral obligation has to match moral capacity. For most people, they don't have the moral capacity to care about these things. That's why a lot of Africans aren't vegetarians, because like the only diet you know consists of chicken, meat, killing animals. You can't afford to deny yourself these kinds of things. So that means like lack of access to things like education and enlightenment and wealth, like the upper class, means then that the lower class don't have that capacity to put that burden upon themselves. So at the very best, a large majority of humanity needs to be put out of that obligation. Even if it's existed like CEO claims, it's unfair to expect people that simply cannot change their lifestyles to meet that obligation to animals and plants. Let's do them the favor and end everything. Then they say, the future of humanity is not certain. We are becoming smarter and the fight against evil always needs to happen. I would note that number one, this is derivative from opening opposition, because at least they wasted lots of time talking about like languages and fire and caveman stuff. All of those are largely relevant. But then I would note that number two, this is an unending war. If Martin Luther King didn't win and Mahatma Gandhi didn't win and Jesus Christ didn't win and we are still fighting against evil, it's an unending cycle that wastes resources and time, and it converts people to become evil just because we also want to fight evil. Therefore, it's a war that humanity would never win, and it makes no sense insofar as evil always continue to exist to engage in that war. There is no justification insofar as OO failed to prove and C also fails to prove that we might win that war with all the AI and the space race shit that we're doing. It means then that it's justified to say, let's opt out of this war and do the cosmic bet and end everything. I don't think they can justify the loss of lives to a war that we've been losing for a millennia. Then CEO says human dignity always has to be protected because your dignity is not tied to you having joy or suffering. I don't think this is true. Number one, I do think that dignity is not measured just by mere existence. It's measured by the quality of that existence. This is why we said slaves didn't have dignity. That's why we think that for billions of people existing right now, their dignity has been structurally stripped, like Israel proved to you. That means then that to continue existence means you're subjecting more and more people to indignity. So if indignity is what CEO cares about, they're losing because they want more people to live under systems of oppression where only the top people get to enjoy. We need to take a moral bet that ends all of that indignity. We're protecting dignity more than CEO does. They're losing to us on that particular like thing, right? Then they say, utilitarianism cannot be the metric to say we are going to end all of life because you cannot justify killing physically challenged people. But no, like I would note that this response is something Israel already responded to, because we said that our action is not to say, we are going to end only people who are feeling pain. We said everybody. So like, I don't think our case racist to say only people that were suffering. Even the people that are enjoying is a proof that they are enjoying because we are causing irreparable harm to the cosmos. Humanity is not so special. We could have been the next species that wouldn't have gotten consciousness. We just randomly gained consciousness. Why wasn't it cockroaches? Why wasn't it amoeba? Why wasn't it other cells? Like, just accidentally becoming conscious doesn't give you the right to pollute space with satellites and pollute water bodies and like send shit into the atmosphere and hurt all of universal like entities just because you think your species is the most important one. That means whether you are happy or you are sad, the harm principally can only proportionately be fixed by taking the cosmos bet. These guys are not beating us. They fail to respond to us in a particular regard. Yeah, but can you guys pause my timer? Because like somebody is knocking on my door. It's 3:43. Please pause it. Pause it. Thanks. I'm back. Yeah, so like I think 5 seconds extra. You might have to like ram me back into that, but just keep putting a POS in the chat space. Don't unmute. Like I'm looking at the chat space. So I'm gonna be resuming shortly. Where was I? Cool. Yeah, scene. Cool. I'm gonna then resume in 3, 2, 1. Moving on to opening opposition. Then they say this is an actor debate. They want to know why should the actor be the one to decide for several people. This is very silly, but have responses to this. Number one, I think all the fight because every decision in history has been made by a small subset of people speaking for others. Because governments declare wars, scientists alter the planet's climate trajectory, parents decide to bring or not to bring children into existence. Humanity is always operated through a representative moral agency. That means the motion only makes it explicit and it makes sense to argue. But then also even in OO side, the silence to not take an action is a choice. That means if they reject the cosmic bet on their side, it means then that they are also making a choice on behalf of everyone. That question cannot be the metric OO wants to win this debate on. But then OO says that look, human life is on a good trajectory. All of that fancy AI stuff we tell you about, that means eventually in the future we would end everything and no suffering would exist. I would note that number one, the progress has been very selective. It's not being universal because the existence of AI in space travel and medicine doesn't mean that the distribution of those goods has improved, because it has only proved that some people suffer differently. Because right now, some people can afford to live longer, but others die in new forms of misery. For example, climate displacement, like algorithmic poverty, like psychologically decay because of like the hyper modern life and the rat race that they can't keep up with. That means all of the goodies OO preaches comes with selective harms that targets the most minority that can't escape this, and they die. So you're not going to eventually and the suffering like they claim. But then OO then says, well, look, they think that, well, suffering cannot cease to exist because happiness needs to have value. And then we can't measure happiness if there is no pain to benchmark it to. I would note that number one, if happiness depends on suffering, then that happiness is morally parasitic, because we say if joy requires someone else's pain, then the system of consciousness that all of humanity exists in is ethically corrupt. This argument then means then that it's a necessary thing to take this cosmic bet to eradicate everything that these guys talk about. I'll take a POI. Shoot. Opening a position, like shoot.
I think the problem is you just assume that we can't solve the issue. So what we should do is just terminate everyone's life. If you have to defend protecting certain agencies of everybody, you have to also defend terminating the agencies of everybody because of that sole decision.
That's precisely what these are proved to you. We proved you cannot solve it. Your consciousness as a species requires you to exploit, requires you to be arrogant, requires you to be selfish. That's why we don't care about Mars. We think Mars is something that human beings have a right to go and explore and inhabit. Like we are just aliens, we can go and fight in Mars and Venus and conquer other planets. We don't give a fuck about everybody but ourselves. The hubris of this species is one that is such that we cause cosmos harm for a millennia and a millennia to come with no justification to show for it, except more children in hunger and more people displaced and more African countries being put in cycles of new colonization. That is a harm you haven't justified in 40 minutes of your speech. You feel the bet needs to happen, everybody needs to go. Why are we winning over our opening then? Because our case is the one that that argues why, in principle, this bet needs to happen, aside the fact that maybe some people are suffering, maybe some people are not suffering. Because we prove to you that, number one, there need to be a proportionate purity to the harm that exists. Because, like, the OG doesn't talk to you about what it means to continue to exist. We prove that, for example, number one, this means you're going to have continued population growth. But then also this means that, number two, countries have to prove that they are given some kind of utility and sovereignty to their people. That means resource acquisition. That means more environmental harm. But then also, note panel, we are the team
Thank
that
you very
pushes
much.
our government.
Thank you very much, Government Whip. I added the
CJ.
5 seconds and time's up. Thank you very much, Government Whip, for the fine speech. Closing up, close today's debate. Here.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible, Oscar.
Okay, so before I begin, I'd like to give shout outs to my sister, University of Ghana Debate Society, and Chrissy. Yeah. So I'm beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. In the early years of humanity, King Louis IX of France died because of dysentery. In present day world, no president is ever going to die of dysentery. And I'm showing why that case on humanity's probability of consistently minimizing pain is infinitely more important. But I think something we need to clear is that it is unfair to say that we are consistently going to eradicate all suffering from the world. That burden can't be the burden on our world because, like, we can't end suffering. What we are showing to you is that when we place this wager and the bets, that proportionally our side is better off, and think that is better. But I think something that we need to clarify from the top of the debate is that everyone keeps saying that humanity is suffering and everything. What you need to realize is that the things that cause this suffering are things that we can't control. So the lottery of birth, like, it is not my fault that someone is born in the United States. It's not my fault that someone is born into Singapore, into the riches of their family. That inherently means that killing these people, in addition to all the suffering of other minorities, is no justification, especially when these people are not directly accountable for the suffering they are suffering. But even beyond that, there are numerous people who are doing a lot of things. Like, people are donating charities to minorities, even when they are not directly accountable. People have learned to give us medicine in all these things in that regard. What it inherently means that historically, and like even in status quo, the amount of good that people consistently do is something that makes it equivalent on the side of suffering. But when I'm explaining my extension, I'll be going more into that. Why opening opposition is out of today's debate. I think every side agrees that opening opposition out of today's debate, because the info slide says that speaking of for all humanity, right? What it inherently means that they cannot say that there's justification lies on an individual person to take this action. But even beyond that, what makes it more problematic, aside them doing that, is that they run their cases on consensus as to why this individual should not take that action. I think that is problematic. The last thing then they tell you is that, oh, fear of death is the reason why humans cannot progress and that suffering is needed for joy. We don't think that is true, because human beings can always experience joy without suffering. I think that opening opposition, that's a bad job. And that's why the government is able to run a lot of the rubbish they run. And I'll prove it to where closing government is the only side winning today's finals. Right into our extensions and why they are the best, right? And I'll be directly clashing our extensions with the government side. The first extension then you get from us. And I think like closing government, that's a very shady job to respond to our extensions. And I'll be doing that when I also tackle them, right? But the first thing that it gets from us is on humanity's constant progress to make life better. Because we recognize and bite the bullets that suffering exists and that structural suffering is problematic. The first thing that we say is that not all humans can be held accountable for this suffering because of things I've told, like lottery of birth, like indiscriminate proportion of resources. Like, other countries have more resources than other countries. That inherently says that there's no justification for all these other people to lose their lives in far as to benefit minorities. Panel, notice that this is not to say that we do not care about minorities. What this is saying is that the justification that they give you is not enough, in far as these people are not directly accountable in that regard. But that's why this is even more beneficial, is that person tells you that humans are consistently trying to minimize the suffering that exists. That is why no one is going to die of dysentery in today's world, like Louis I of France, because we have things like you have things like X-ray machines that are constantly helping to minimize the suffering of people in that regard. You think it's better. But lastly, what Kwesi tells you and what these people ignore is the moral obligation to the universe. And I don't know whether Super Nana is God or Super Nana created the universe, because I don't know how Super Nana knows that animals existed before humanity. We do not know that. What you know is that in humanity's existence, our environment is the reason why we've been able to thrive. So things like the carbon dioxide, the oxygen that we get from these trees, or the meats that we get from plants and animals, and all those things are the reasons that humanity has been able to exist regardless of our inventions. What it inherently means that all it to the universe to stay alive in that regard This is a moral obligation on all humanity because our death alone means that the cosmos is going to collapse in that regard. If you are the side that cares about the cosmos existence, the side that gives you that is closing opposition in that regard. That's why extensions are the best in today's debate. But I'm doing closing government. The reason why moral framework today's debate can't be on utilitarian mechanism that the utilitarian mechanism does not be enough justification to the fact that people are not directly responsible for the suffering of other people, unless they were able to magically prove to us that everyone or every rich person is directly responsible for the suffering of every poor person. Things does not justify to kill them in along the tank. I think that's bad. But the second thing that closing government tells you that is very ridiculous is that closing government tells you that because of cognitive problems and psychological frameworks, it is bad because humans need to detect threats. You told that the existence of humanity and humanity's value is it tied to people's suffering or people's ability to detect threats. The very fact that you exist alone is your dignity. What it inherently means is that the reason why Donald Trump or Elon Musk is no more human than you, panel. It's not because they have more money or it's not because they have less suffering, but because all of us are human. Even if they say that the quality of life is part of human dignity, you think that on 2 layers, you are able to spread 2 layers of human dignity. The very first of human existence, and even beyond that, the ability for you to consistently have a better life. Opening government and why we are beating opening government in today's debate. I think opening government does a couple of things in today's debate that makes it our cases directly respond to their case. What they primarily tell you is that suffering is harmful and we don't wish to lead other generations to suffering. That directly clashes with what the reality is. Because what the reality is that there have been our ancestors, Thomas Edison, the likes of Albert Einstein, who be grinding in their graves because what you are saying is that all their works have been in vain. You cannot say that because future generations are going to suffer from this, you do not take this action. Because you inherently think that reality is enough justification for that response is based on reality. You think that deals with their case. But the second thing they tell you then is on scale of harms. Now, scale of harms, right, in our world, it's a better, like you get is better in our world. What's the comparative? Because unlike the world where you end the cosmos and like recognize that we show you how we are going to end the cosmos because the universe depends on us, like we depend on the universe. What's the answer that on scale of harms, our scale of harms is increasingly worse because when you recognize that you are going to destroy other living things and the cosmos at large, think that is a larger scale. So if you are the panelist that wants scope and scale of harm, you think it's better in our world because we protect larger group of audiences in that regard. The last thing that opening government tells you is that the moral consequence of people's existence and that asymmetry of harm and suffering against minorities. Panel, recognize that minorities have suffered and like we are sorry for their pain. But the fact that minorities have suffered and the fact that you are going to end the total of humanity is not enough justification insofar as humans are also doing their possible best to minimize suffering. What this looks like is the constant inversions, the constant charities that people are doing. I think that this is enough insofar as these people are not also necessarily directly accountable for all the harms that have been existing. But what even makes it more detrimental is when you consider what exists in their world, where this looks like the destruction of the cosmos by stripping people of their existence in order to achieve any other thing that they want. What you tell you as a side is that the universe depends on us as much as we depend on the universe. Killing humanity just to make up the suffering of other people, especially when rich humans are not directly responsible. It's unethical. Proudly, CEO.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Closing web for the fine speech. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Hasana. Thank you, Kela. Thank you, Serge. Thank you, Ezel. Thank you, Supanana. Thank you, Kwesi. And thank you, Oscar. Thank you all for wonderful speeches. This was a great finals. My panelists and I would move to deliberation and would decide and then would let you know at the awards. Thank you so much, everybody, the audience. We'll meet at the ceremony. Thank you. Bye-bye. Please let's move on to Discord deliberation room 1, panelists.
Right, thanks everyone. The finals announcement will happen in like an hour and we'll share the Zoom link again. Thanks.